Suraj is in his early 30s. He has profound and multiple learning disabilities. Possibly out of a sense of frustration, he self-harms. Suraj's care team aims to transform his self-harm into more productive activity.
When he was born, he was only about 4 or 5 pounds. Born before the time. I think it was 7-month birth, and he couldn't eat or drink. They told me that we need an operation on him, to operate on him to make him eat and drink, because he can't dissolve anything inside. So the operation was done. After that, he was okay. We started realizing that he was different. He wouldn't laugh the way other children laugh. He couldn't communicate as the other children could, by smiling and by laughing and by screaming or crying. After 3 or 4 years, when a social worker came in, and they told us that he is a disabled child, that he was born like that. Obviously, after 3-4 years, he wasn't talking. Walking was no problem. He would walk here, he would run like normal kids. And then usually you used to have a sofa here, he used to stand on there and go, ooh, enjoy himself, and everything. One day he was walking and he just struggled a bit and then fell. When he fell, and I realized something is going wrong with his legs. I don't know what happened. He couldn't tell us where his pains are. He couldn't tell us what kind of pains he's having. Not even by communicating. He would cry sometimes, and we thought, okay, let's check his teeth, let's check his ears and eyesight. They did everything. And then one day, when we were going to take him to doctor, it was cold outside. He had an attack that turned his face round. We found out that it struck his brain somehow. It was a kind of stroke which made him, paralyzed, to be honest with you. As he grew up, the time came when he started hitting himself. In that procedure, they tried to give him some, like you see, he's got arm gaiters on. We used that long time ago before. And his helmet, they started supplying everything for him. And then we used to give him medicine as well to keep him calm. Things like that been happening for 10-15 years maybe, hitting and this and that, going to one place, changing it, they say, oh, sorry, we can't handle him, we can't take care of him. These things have been happening up and down, hitting, stopping, So we got the arm gaiters back on, helmet is back on, and that's where he started hitting on his legs, on his thighs. He used to make a fist on his purpose. He meant to do this by making fist and then hitting himself, and telling us, I'm going to do it. There's nobody can stop me. He's got some kind of satisfaction hitting himself, If you stop him hitting from here, he will start somewhere else. And if you stop him from there, he will start somewhere else. He's been going all over his face and his body. You can see on his ears, left and right, they're sore, still does if he doesn't have a helmet. Started bleeding, used to bleed from both ears, sometimes his head. He used to bang with his left or right hand. My wife was feeding him, and I think he was trying to hit himself, hit her. Broke her 2-3 teeth, in one go, and she screamed and she said, my God, this is how he hits himself. Is that hard he hits himself? My God, how is he surviving? I don't know. When he sees people, I think he can recognize them, and he knows his mom is coming to feed him. Like his mom went to Pakistan for 6 to 8 weeks, and she stayed longer. Well, about 3-4 months before she came back. And when she came back, she went straight to his room And since he's telling me is that he turned his face from me. He looked at the side and I'm shouting, Suraj, Suraj, your dinner, your food and everything. He's not even looking. And then she said, I just came down crying. I said, my God, my son's gone unhappy with me. What have I done? You know, maybe he's missing me so long. Obviously, he's missed his mom. And she said, my God, he's doing this because his mom is back and he doesn't like it. So she said, Suraj, please. And he turns around and goes, and started crying. And she said, I started crying. Then he started eating and then drinking and we got used to it, back to normal.
Let's do that bit.
I will, love you. You ready, Suraj? Come on up, love. Come on up. Dinner time, love. Come on, Suraj. That's it, well done. Anyone wanted to get up? You?
I have to force him in the chair. He's relaxing, he's happy, you know, and suddenly I pick him up and he sees the bloody wheelchair getting ready and he just starts screaming and pushing me and pushing the wheelchair. So that's when I realized that he feels that this is not nice for him, you know. He can feel it and he's trying to get up. Only his feet are tied on that seating, otherwise he would just jump out of it, you know. So this is the situation now in Shipley Resource Centre. His helmet was off, his arm gaiters were off, no hitting, although his ears were swollen, but they'll stay there because he's been like a boxer hitting himself on the ear and face. But they did, and we were all happy, wife was happy, everybody was, oh, at least they done that. And suddenly, it started again.
There is a theory that people who aren't provided with the right level of stimulation will necessarily create stimulation from themselves. And obviously someone like Suraj will be limited in how he can do that. So it's not surprising necessarily that he would bang hard in various places of his body and do that in a repetitive, continual, stereotype way in the lack of anything else purposeful to do for himself.
Part of our training when we first started in care was to put ourselves in a service user's position. To be given that experience, we had to be a service user for half a day in the morning in a wheelchair, because up to that point we knew nothing. It felt very strange not being able to talk and only give eye contact, or even to move our hands or our feet. Emptiness, dread, fear of what may happen, deep down frustration really, because we couldn't speak. It was very scary. It really felt enlightened in a sense that we didn't know how to empathise with that person in the chair. We just thought it was just a question of grabbing all the handles and pushing.
In a way, he can sense a lack of control, and by self-injuring, it might bring him to that level of comfort, of some kind of, okay, I don't have anything else, but by hitting myself, I get to that point when, you know, I have control, I have some sort of control and communication to other people. It's very possible for him to communicate to others saying, I'm doing this because this is how, you know, I get either expressing myself that I have any sort of pain, or I'm extremely happy and I can't control my emotions. And this is like, by hitting myself, I just get to that normal level of either avoiding the pain that I have by creating other pain, or just hitting my face to just avoid the extreme emotions of being over happy or just over excited. Every behavior, it doesn't matter if it's body language or vocalizations or self-harming. What he does is to communicate and say, I'm doing this for a reason and I need the other people to find out that reason and give me an alternative for it.
From what I've observed of Suraj, I think he has a kind of wave of stimulation where he gets to points where he needs a high level of stimulation, and historically I think he's got that from hitting himself. And once he's kind of got that stimulation, then he'll kind of calm down for a little bit, so it'll kind of plateau, I guess, and he'll calm down and be very sort of calm, and then it'll build again to the point where he needs more stimulation. So it kind of comes in this cycle, and I guess what's really needed to make him a bit safer is to observe when those waves are happening and to know when to interact with him and find a way to give him that stimulation that he needs at those points, so that he can then calm down a little bit for a while. And at that point, I think actually you can be a little more hands-off and just let him chill out if he's got the stimulation that he needs. Enjoying the wrestle, Suraj? Yeah, there are little things he does which you kind of may miss to start with, but once you've worked with him for a bit, you see that he's demonstrating that he's, maybe a bit more chilled out or a bit more happy. So, for example, if he's rotating his index finger on his right hand in quite a sort of gentle fashion, he's usually quite calm when he's doing that. It's amazing to see how calm Suraj is at this moment. It's the first time we've been out for a while, particularly to here actually, because the weather's not been so good, but it's quite nice and warm today and sunny, and I think he's just enjoying being out in the sunshine.
His hands are so soft at the moment. He's actually relaxed. When he sits in the wheelchair, his shoulders get tired of the whole hitting his face and the constant movement of his arm. And once he's on the mat, he wiggles a lot. He moves around, which is very intense. and just any physical contact, he actually seeks for it by wiggling and just kind of dragging himself towards the person that's sitting on the mat. Suraj also likes to wrestle, and he takes enjoyment out of it, from the pressure, from the physical contact, from just the whole communication with him without using words. You can read it. You can read a response that's kind of a game for him. He really likes it, enjoys it, and he loves. And he actually looks for more. And the way his body moves and the wiggles are different.
There's one thing I find amazing about Suraj is his curiosity on objects, or not even objects, just in his own space as well. He likes sometimes looking at flashing lights, or if you give him an object, the skills he's got just to observe that object is amazing. He's really intelligent because he won't just look at it, he'll taste it and then he'll leave it and then he'll come back to it.
In the beginning, we weren't sure if this guy'd enjoy you touching him or being in his personal space. So it took a long process to get there. But eventually we did realise he does like in his personal space, he does like being interacted with, he does like being around people. And we just kept trying different things with him.
I think I've proved to women that he's not going to hurt you. He's not doing it to hurt anybody. It's a self-stimulant. So as long as you're aware when you're dealing with him that his arm will lift and hurt you if he hits you with it. And I think women have really changed how they're dealing with him now, because I think they're realising that just a gentle touch on his arm can make him stop, because they've got that gentle approach. Most of women have got, softer voices. And I think that has got to have helped him over years.
That's well done. If he objects to anything when you're a service user, we are not supposed to restrain him. We're not supposed to hold the hand. We have to allow that hand, that free movement.
Okay. Ha ha, we got a smile then, didn't we? We did, we got a smile.
What we can do is give him verbal instructions that if he's getting too agitated with the hand, is to try and calm him by asking if you can hold his hand, if he allows you to do that, or you just back off a little bit till he calms again and then move forward. Getting to know him is the main key, so we've got to learn from him.
Just your hand again. Oh, did that tickle? Sorry, did that tickle?
Since working with him, I found that he's started to calm, give eye contact, communication skills getting better, so that we can understand what he's trying to say, even in a non-verbal way. What we have to remember is that we've got to talk to the client all the time. That's to reassure them what we're going to do instead of sudden movements that can distress them. Because at the end of the day, they're in your care. The idea of that is that they will get more of a one-to-one contact, and that person that's doing the care has to learn how to communicate. And that's the hardest job at the moment. But Suraj is coming out very nicely. He's beginning to respond to a lot of stimuli from talk. If you ask him to do something, he's beginning to do it, and he's beginning to relax, and he's not doing as much hitting, because when he's got a one-to-one, he seems a different person.
Oh, you've got one, but it's not. It's the wrong one. Nope, the wrong one. One. Oh, you've got hold of the pig. Wow, no, that's not good. On that one.
With Suraj, I feel like he's sort of like a mirror. So if I was to work with him, I'd find the things that he'd like to do and use those. But if someone else was to work with him, they'd probably find something different. However you put your effort into him, it'd pay off just by him interacting with you.
The way he turns his head is like where he wants to be scratched.
There's no reason why anybody can't do intensive interaction. It's no way is it a technically difficult thing. It's not rocket science, and you don't need qualifications to do it. Although there are a few simple features to intensive interaction that we might want to keep in our minds. The main one being that we are responsive to the person as they are when we are with them. So we look at them, look at their behaviour, and find some things that we can join in with or reflect back. And we treat everyone as an intentional communicator. So we use the term imputing intentionality to behaviours that might not be intentional communications, but can become so if we respond to them. So things like rhythm that a person would do, if we join in with it, reflect it back, that can become the means through which we socially engage and communicate with a person. And of course that means that we have to adapt to them as they are, rather than expecting them to adapt to us or to an expectation we have that they will behave in certain ways. And so we use those pointers to find a means of connection, and it's not rocket science, because most of us find it very easy to communicate with people who are generally in those early communication stages. They tend to be pre-verbal infants, our own offspring, or our family members who are in those early stages, and we can spend long times socially engaging with them. It's the natural model of social communication development. Unfortunately, when we sit with people who are adults, as many of the people I work with, someone like Suraj, we find that for some reason more difficult. We want to do a task with them, get them to comply with some directions and do some activity that we value, rather than us looking to them as the basis of our communication and our engagement, and using that as a point from which we can spiral up and create meaning and develop things over time that will become more sophisticated. As social beings, we all need mutually affirming social engagements at some level, at the right level. And for people who have got a profound level of intellectual communication impairment, it is our job to try and find the means to do that. My thoughts on intensive interaction are that it's not a therapy as such, although some people do see it, I think increasingly, as having therapeutic aspects to it. It's more a means of connecting with somebody and giving a sense of themselves. We value what they do, we use that as the basis of communication and use the person's behaviour as a means to connect socially with them by somehow joining in with it or reflecting it back. Intensive interaction makes it possible for us to have a conversation without words, really, but instead through body language or eye contact or non-symbolic vocalizations or the sounds that a person makes, and that gives us a means of sharing a mutually significant communication. It gives a context through which we can value a person's behaviour and give something positive back. Sometimes, though, we have to understand that the body language, the movements, the facial expressions that someone might make are not certain in terms of our interpretation. And we have to understand that we have to deal with that level of uncertainty and not get stuck on wanting to translate that into our language, into our symbolic means of communication. With intensive interaction being process-driven, rather than, say, outcome-focused, we don't set targets for where we want to go, we develop naturally from where we are. What we set out to create through intensive interaction is meaningful two-way communication, so that the person is a genuine participant in the social engagement between the two people. I think very often we might get a situation where the person with a social impairment or a communication impairment is a recipient of our communication in the means that we want to impart it. What we're trying to get with intensive interaction is that sense that it's meaningful to both partners within the process, and it's a two-way, genuine, turn-taking, two-way intensive interaction, starting with the person's behaviour, enables us to do exactly that, create meaningful two-way communication. One of the important ingredients that we have in terms of our intensive interaction is that idea of repeating or going back to what is familiar for the person. Starting with what the person does means that that is familiar. We might be capable of adding a little bit extra. I often go back to the familiar rhythm that a person might use. Say Suraj's, banging rhythm, that be the main basis through which we would all engage with him, although again, through some process of creativity, we might think of adding little bits, as long as we get that balance right. So it's mainly of the person, but also perhaps there is always that open-ended feel that we can add bits when the time is right. But it's not our main focus to try and push on beyond what the person finds reassuring and familiar. We're trying to open it up rather than drive it on.
8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
So we know that Suraj has, for a very, very long time, engaged in self-harm, and he seems to get something from hitting himself really quite hard. And what we managed to do with the intensive interaction side of things was to explore that further, and we found that actually perhaps what he was doing was getting a really intense sensation from hitting himself and enjoying that, enjoying the way it feels and enjoying the rhythm, doing it in a very rhythmical way. And when we've tried to match that and mirror that with intensive interaction, that's what's led to this gorgeous breakthrough moment we had with him when we found that if we copied that rhythm by banging something really loudly, he eventually noticed that. And he realised that something external to him was creating a rhythm and creating a sound. What we ended up with was enough recognition on his part, perhaps, that something else was going on there that he was interested in. And we had this gorgeous moment where he realised that there was a rhythm and he stopped what he was doing and turned to the noise, turned to that rhythm. And when I paused making that rhythm, he noticed that I'd stopped. And then eventually we got to the point where he reached over and started making that noise himself using the same wooden spoon and the pan that I'd been using. We even had some moments where he was copying rhythms, and if I did one rhythm and then changed it, he'd notice the change. We had this kind of connection going that we'd not had before. So he was still getting that same sensory feedback and enjoying the rhythms, but he was doing it with somebody else. And for somebody who doesn't have any words at all and is otherwise quite locked into themselves, that was a first. So that was the first time that he had connected with somebody else in a very, very, very long time.
1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2. Well done, you really tried.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 2, 3, 4. Well done, Suraj. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3.
Do we want to do a 4-beat now? Suraj, do you want to learn a 4-beat? Ready? 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. Right, again. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 4. 1, 2, 3.
Come on, Chaz.
1, 2, 3, 4.
I'm okay to
1,
make my fair
2,
enough.
3,
Is that
1.
alright?
I, E, I, O. On, down, have, cow. E, I, O.
We did try symbols and objects of reference with Suraj in the beginning, which weren't as effective as the tactile stuff. We established he liked sound, he liked music. From there on we started trying different activities with him.
Well done, Suraj, well done.
Perhaps rhythm is his language because he doesn't have words, and for somebody who's relying on non-verbal behaviours, facial expressions, sounds to communicate, we need to observe that and watch and listen and work out which of those is their language, what is their language, and then we need to use that, because there's no point trying to communicate with somebody in a language that they don't have or they don't use. So if rhythm's his language, fantastic, let's use rhythm. So what we can learn from Suraj is similar to what we can learn from lots of people with profound and multiple learning disabilities, because more often than not they won't have the use of words to communicate. And what that means is they are completely dependent on people around them to interpret those behaviours, facial expressions, sounds, eye movements, all those kinds of things. And they'll be different for each person. And so the carers need to really have time to get to know someone and get to know them inside out so that they can interpret that person's communication, which is why it's so important to have kind of consistent carers if you can, people who are familiar with them, people who've known them for a long time, people who see them every day. We know that he moves his finger around. We've never really any absolute definite way of knowing exactly what that might mean for Suraj, or whether he's even intending to communicate anything. So you could have a group of 5 carers and they all might potentially interpret that one movement 5 different ways. And if those 5 carers aren't ever given the chance to get together to talk about that and think about it together, that person might always get 5 different responses to their one behaviour. And if they get 5 different responses, that behaviour perhaps potentially could have even less meaning. Whereas if they always got one response, they might then develop that behaviour to become something that is intentional and does mean something specific, and then they can use that. And equally, while you might have 5 different perceptions of what something might mean, those 5 perceptions could all be right and are equally valid. It can be really, really difficult to understand what somebody means. But then it also makes you wonder, how important is it to understand every single little behaviour? Is that more important than having a way of being with someone, enjoying being with them, building those connections, building that enjoyment of communication? Depends what your goal is, doesn't it? Depends what you want out of being with somebody. But if getting to know somebody is your goal, then perhaps just being with them is more important than trying to work out specific detailed meanings of every tiny behaviour and facial expression. That person that I'm working with, I've got as much to learn from them as they have from anybody else around them, and I want to be open to that. And I don't want their life to be a wasted life. That's the other thing, isn't it?
Just doing 2 beats, you say. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2.
Somebody who's maybe going to live for 40 years and then die, and nobody managed to unlock that potential and nobody managed to get in there, because that is just a wasted life. I don't want to let that happen. They don't have to be wasted lives, do they? You know, the human beings with just as much potential as anybody else, and let's unlock it and let's find out what's in there. Let's not let it be wasted. Let's learn from that person.
Yes. When they were up, they were up, and when they were down, they were down, and when they were only halfway up, they were neither up nor down, but up.
Postscript, February 2015. A new custom-made wheelchair improves Suraj's comfort. An attached wrist cuff prevents self-injury, whilst allowing free movement. Carers immediately see a more relaxed Suraj.